Royal Watchman Story. Part 1. Marcus had been standing guard at the eastern gate of the royal palace for 3 years, and today felt no different from any other. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as he adjusted his leather armor and checked his sword for the 100th time. Being a royal watchman was mostly about routine, checking papers, nodding at familiar faces, and trying not to fall asleep during the quiet afternoon hours. The palace buzzed with its usual activity. Servants hurried past carrying baskets of fresh bread and linens. Merchants lined up with their goods hoping to catch the attention of the royal household. Children from the nearby village pressed their faces against the iron bars, trying to glimpse the grandeur within. Marcus knew every face, every regular visitor, every delivery schedule by heart. At midday, a food cart approached his gate. Old Henrik, the baker, waved cheerfully as he always did. "Morning, Marcus. Got the usual order for the kitchen staff today." Marcus barely glanced at the familiar wooden cart filled with loaves of bread and pastries. He had checked this same cart hundreds of times before. A quick look, a friendly nod, and Henrik would wheel his cart toward the servants' entrance. But something felt different today, though Marcus couldn't put his finger on what it was. Henrik seemed nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he arranged the bread in his cart. The old baker kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear behind him. When Marcus asked if everything was all right, Henrik just mumbled something about his wife being sick and hurried past. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors. Lady Catherine's seamstress arrived with a bundle of silk fabrics. The royal physician came and went, carrying his leather bag of medicines. 2 young nobles rode up on horseback, laughing loudly about some joke they had shared. Marcus processed each visitor with practiced efficiency, but Henrik's strange behavior continued to nag at him. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting orange light across the palace walls, Marcus noticed unusual activity near the main entrance. Royal guards were moving with more purpose than usual. Messengers rode out through the gates at full speed, their horses' hooves clattering loudly on the stone. Something important was happening, but no one had bothered to inform the gate guards about it. Marcus's fellow watchman, Thomas, jogged over from his post at the northern gate. His face was flushed with excitement and worry. "Have you heard anything about what's going on? The captain came by my post an hour ago, asking if I'd seen any suspicious activity. He looked really concerned about something." Before Marcus could answer, a group of senior palace officials emerged from the main building. They moved in tight formation, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Marcus recognized the royal treasurer, the head of palace security, and several advisors he had seen at official ceremonies. Their expressions were grim, and they kept looking around as if they expected danger to emerge from the shadows. The head of security, Commander Reynolds, broke away from the group and approached Marcus's gate. The commander was a stern man in his 50s with graying hair and scars on his hands from years of military service. He rarely spoke to the regular guards unless something serious was happening. Marcus straightened his posture and tried to look as professional as possible. "Guard, I need you to be extra vigilant today," Commander Reynolds said, his voice low and serious. "We have reason to believe that someone may attempt to breach palace security. Check everyone carefully, even people you know well. Trust no one today." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. In 3 years of service, he had never received such a warning. "Sir, should I be looking for anyone in particular? Any specific threat?" The commander's eyes scanned the courtyard before returning to Marcus. "We're not certain yet. Just stay alert and report anything unusual immediately, no matter how small it might seem." With that, he turned and rejoined the group of officials, leaving Marcus with more questions than answers. The remaining daylight hours passed slowly. Every visitor now seemed potentially dangerous. The friendly merchant who brought spices every week suddenly looked suspicious. The young woman delivering flowers to the royal gardens made Marcus wonder if she was really who she claimed to be. Even the palace cat seemed to be moving differently, as if they sensed the tension in the air. As evening approached, Marcus realized he had been gripping his sword hilt unconsciously for the past hour. His muscles ached from being constantly tense, and his eyes burned from scanning every face, every shadow, every movement in the courtyard. Whatever was causing the alarm among the palace leadership, it was serious enough to put everyone on edge. The last of the day's regular visitors had departed, and the evening shift of guards would arrive soon. Marcus looked forward to ending his watch and getting some answers about what had caused such concern. But deep down, he suspected that this was only the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous than a simple security alert. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Marcus noticed a lone figure approaching his gate from the direction of the main road. The person walked with a confident stride, but their face was hidden in the shadows. Something about the way they moved, the purposeful nature of their approach, made Marcus's hand instinctively move to his sword. The figure drew closer, and Marcus could see it was a tall person wearing a dark cloak. They walked directly toward his gate without hesitation, as if they knew exactly where they were going. Marcus stepped forward, ready to challenge the approaching stranger, when something about their bearing made him pause. There was something familiar about the way this person carried themselves, something that reminded Marcus of the military officers he had served under during his training. The confident posture, the measured steps, the way they held their head high despite the late hour and the growing darkness. But as the figure came within 20 feet of his gate, Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. Moonlight glinted off metal at the person's side. They were carrying a weapon. Royal Watchman Story, Part 2. Marcus drew his sword halfway from its sheath, the metal singing softly in the evening air. His training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat, maintain distance, call for backup if needed. The approaching figure showed no signs of stopping or identifying themselves, which violated every protocol for approaching the royal palace after dark. "Halt," Marcus called out, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "State your name and business at the palace." The cloaked figure paused but did not step back. Instead, they reached up slowly and pulled back their hood, revealing a face that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Even in the dim moonlight, he recognized the sharp features, the piercing eyes, and the distinctive scar that ran from the left temple to the jawline. It was Colonel Sarah Blackwood, the legendary military commander who had disappeared 3 months ago during a classified mission beyond the kingdom's borders. Marcus had seen her portrait in the royal gallery, and had heard countless stories about her tactical brilliance and unwavering loyalty to the crown. She was considered one of the finest military minds in the realm, a hero whose exploits were whispered about in taverns and training grounds alike. But she was supposed to be dead. The official reports had declared her missing in action, presumed killed while leading a reconnaissance mission into enemy territory. The king himself had delivered a eulogy praising her service and sacrifice. Her name had been carved into the memorial wall alongside other fallen heroes. Yet here she stood, very much alive, approaching the palace gates with a weapon at her side and an expression that Marcus could not read. "Colonel Blackwood?" Marcus whispered, unsure whether he was seeing a ghost or losing his mind. His hand remained on his sword, but confusion now mixed with his caution. Sarah stepped closer, and Marcus could see that her face bore the marks of recent hardship. Her usually perfect military bearing showed signs of exhaustion, and her clothes, while clean, had clearly seen hard travel. The weapon at her side was not the ceremonial sword she had worn during official functions, but a practical military blade designed for real combat. "Guard," she said, her voice carrying the same authority that had once commanded thousands of soldiers. "I need to speak with the king immediately. It's a matter of urgent national security." Marcus felt torn between duty and disbelief. Protocol demanded that he deny entry to anyone who could not provide proper identification and authorization, especially after the security alert earlier that day. But this was Colonel Blackwood. If she was truly alive and had returned with critical information, delaying her could put the entire kingdom at risk. "Ma'am, with respect, you've been declared dead for 3 months. The palace security has been heightened today, and I'm under orders to trust no one. I need to verify your identity and get authorization from my superiors before I can allow you entry." Sarah nodded, as if she had expected this response. "You're following proper protocol, guard. What's your name?" "Marcus, ma'am." "Marcus Webb." "Well, Marcus Webb, you're right to be cautious, but I need you to understand that lives are at stake. The mission I was sent on revealed information that could change the course of the war. Every minute we delay puts our people in greater danger." She reached slowly into her cloak, and Marcus tensed, ready to draw his sword completely. But instead of a weapon, she produced a small object that glinted in the moonlight, the royal seal that had been given to her before her departure on the classified mission. Marcus recognized the seal immediately. It was one of only 5 in existence, each bearing the king's personal mark and granted only to the most trusted agents of the crown. The seal gave its bearer the authority to act on the king's behalf in matters of extreme urgency. But it also made Sarah's presence even more puzzling. Why would she approach through a side gate instead of the main entrance? Why hadn't she sent word ahead of her arrival? I know this raises questions, Sarah continued, reading the confusion on Marcus's face. The nature of my mission required complete secrecy. I couldn't risk sending messages ahead. We don't know who might be intercepting palace communications. I chose this entrance because I know you, Marcus. I've read the reports about your service record. You're trustworthy and competent. Marcus was surprised that she knew his name and service history. You've read reports about me? Part of my job was knowing every person who had access to palace security. You distinguished yourself during the border conflicts 2 years ago. Your commanding officer recommended you for this position specifically because of your judgment and integrity. The compliment meant more to Marcus than he expected, coming from someone of Colonel Blackwood's reputation. But it also made him more suspicious. Was she trying to manipulate him with flattery? The security briefing earlier that day had warned him to trust no one, even people he thought he knew well. Before Marcus could respond, footsteps echoed across the courtyard. 3 palace guards approached at a quick pace, their own hands resting on their sword hilts. Thomas, the guard from the northern gate, was among them, along with 2 senior guards Marcus recognized from the day shift. Marcus, is everything all right here? Called out Sergeant Davies, the most experienced of the approaching guards, his eyes fixed on Sarah, taking in her military bearing and the weapon at her side. Sarah straightened to her full height and spoke before Marcus could answer. Sergeant Davies, I am Colonel Sarah Blackwood, returning from a classified mission under direct orders from the Crown. I carry urgent information that must reach the king immediately. The 3 guards stopped short, exchanging glances of disbelief. Like Marcus, they all recognized the name and face of the legendary colonel, who was supposed to be dead. But their training had also prepared them for situations like this. Enemy agents using the identities of dead heroes to gain access to the palace. Ma'am, Sergeant Davies said carefully. Colonel Blackwood was declared killed in action 3 months ago. We attended her memorial service. If you are who you claim to be, you'll understand why we need to follow security procedures before allowing you access to the palace. Sarah nodded again, her expression showing no offense at their caution. I would expect nothing less, but I need you to understand that the information I carry affects the safety of everyone in this kingdom. While we follow procedures, our enemies may be moving against us. The tension in the courtyard was thick enough to cut with a knife. 4 armed guards faced a woman who claimed to be a dead war hero, each side convinced they were doing their duty. Marcus found himself at the center of a situation far beyond anything his training had prepared him for. In the distance, a bell began to toll from the palace's central tower, the signal that the evening watch was officially beginning. Soon more guards would arrive for the shift change, and whatever decision they made about Colonel Blackwood would become even more complicated. Marcus looked at the royal seal in Sarah's hand, then at the faces of his fellow guards, then back at the woman who had emerged from the shadows with a weapon and a story that seemed impossible to believe. Royal Watchman Story, Part 3. Sergeant Davies stepped forward, his years of experience showing in the way he assessed the situation. Colonel, if you are who you claim to be, you'll know specific details about palace security that only senior officers would know. Can you provide such information? Sarah's eyes hardened with determination. The main vault beneath the treasury has a secondary entrance through the old wine cellars. The king's private study contains a hidden passage behind the bookshelf. 3rd shelf from the top. Press the book titled Ancient Military Strategies. The night watch rotation changes every 4 hours, and the password for tonight's watch is Golden Eagle. Marcus felt his jaw drop. These were closely guarded secrets that only the highest-ranking security personnel knew. Even he wasn't aware of some of these details. The hidden passage in the king's study was something he had only heard whispered about among the senior guards. But Sergeant Davies wasn't finished testing her. What was the name of the stablemaster's horse that died last winter? Without hesitation, Sarah replied, Thunder, a black stallion, 17 years old. He injured his leg during the ice storm in December and had to be put down. Master William mourned him for weeks and refused to replace him until spring. The guards exchanged meaningful looks. This was information that only someone who had been present at the palace would know. Enemy spies might learn military secrets or official protocols, but they wouldn't know personal details about the staff's beloved animals. Thomas spoke up for the first time. "Ma'am, if you are Colonel Blackwood, what happened to you?" "The report said you were killed during a mission across the northern border." Sarah's expression grew dark, and Marcus could see pain flash across her features. "My team was ambushed 2 days into the mission. I was separated from my men during the fighting and presumed dead when they couldn't find my body. I was captured by enemy forces and held prisoner for 2 months." She pulled back her cloak slightly, revealing bandages wrapped around her left arm and what looked like recently healed wounds on her hands. "I escaped 3 weeks ago and have been making my way back through enemy territory. What I learned during my captivity changes everything about this war." Marcus found himself believing her story. The physical evidence of recent combat and imprisonment was convincing, and her knowledge of palace secrets seemed genuine. But he also remembered Commander Reynolds' warning about trusting no one, especially on a day when security was already heightened for unknown reasons. "What kind of information?" Sergeant Davies asked, his tone becoming more respectful but still cautious. Sarah glanced around the courtyard, checking for anyone who might overhear. "The enemy forces we've been fighting, they're not the main threat. They're a distraction, designed to keep our armies busy while the real attack is prepared elsewhere. I learned about a plan to strike at the heart of the kingdom using a method we never anticipated." She reached into her cloak again and withdrew a rolled piece of parchment, sealed with black wax. "This document contains battle plans I copied while in captivity. It details an assault that will begin in 3 days' time. We have that long to prepare our defenses or the kingdom will fall." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable, and Marcus could see that his fellow guards were beginning to share his conviction that this woman was indeed the legendary Colonel Blackwood. But accepting her identity created a new problem: how to get her the audience with the king that she desperately needed. "Ma'am," Sergeant Davies said, "even if we believe you are who you claim to be, we cannot simply escort you to the king's chambers. The proper protocol requires approval from Commander Reynolds, verification from the royal advisors, and confirmation from at least 2 senior officers who can personally vouch for your identity." Sarah's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Sergeant, in 3 days there may not be a king to protect or a kingdom to defend. The bureaucracy that normally safeguards this palace could be the very thing that destroys it." Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the main road. A group of riders was coming toward the palace at considerable speed, their torches creating dancing shadows in the darkness. Marcus counted at least 6 riders, all moving with military precision. "More complications," Thomas muttered, but Sarah's reaction was immediate and alarming. Her hand moved to her weapon, and her entire body tensed like a coiled spring ready to strike. "Those aren't our riders," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I recognize the formation. That's how enemy scouts travel when they're conducting reconnaissance." Marcus strained his eyes to see the approaching riders more clearly. They were still too far away to make out individual features, but something about their approach did seem unusual. Royal messengers typically announced themselves when approaching the palace, and official visitors rarely traveled in such large groups after dark. Sergeant Davies made a quick decision. "Marcus, get inside and alert Commander Reynolds immediately. Thomas, run to the main gate and warn the senior watch. We may be dealing with more than one security threat tonight." As the 2 younger guards prepared to follow orders, Sarah stepped closer to Sergeant Davies. "Sergeant, if those are enemy agents, they're here because of me. My escape was detected and they've tracked me to the palace. We're out of time for proper protocols." The approaching riders were now close enough that Marcus could hear their voices calling out to each other in what sounded like a foreign language. His blood ran cold as he realized that Sarah might be right about their identity. "What do you recommend, Colonel?" Sergeant Davies asked, his formal tone indicating that he had made his decision about her identity. Sarah's eyes scanned the palace walls and the defensive positions around the courtyard. Her military mind was clearly assessing their tactical situation. "We have perhaps 5 minutes before they reach the gates. You need to get me to the king and you need to prepare for a fight. Those riders are advanced scouts. The main force won't be far behind." Marcus felt the world spinning around him. What had started as a routine day of checking papers and nodding at familiar faces had transformed into a situation that could determine the fate of the entire kingdom. The approaching riders, Sarah's urgent message, and the heightened security alert from earlier were all connected in ways he was only beginning to understand. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Marcus could now see the riders clearly. They wore dark clothing and carried weapons that gleamed in the torchlight. Most disturbing of all, they were not slowing down as they approached the palace gates. They were accelerating. "They're not coming to talk," Sarah said grimly, drawing her sword in one fluid motion. "They're coming to attack." Royal Watchman Story. Part 4. The first arrow whistled past Marcus's ear and struck the stone wall behind him, sending sparks flying in the darkness. The enemy riders had reached the outer courtyard and were launching their attack without warning or demand for surrender. Marcus drew his sword completely and took cover behind the iron gates, his heart pounding as reality crashed down around him. Sarah moved like liquid lightning, rolling behind a stone pillar as more arrows filled the air where she had been standing. "Sergeant Davies!" She shouted over the sound of hoofbeats and battle cries. "The main attack starts in 3 days, but they sent this advance team to eliminate me before I could warn the king. We cannot let them succeed." Sergeant Davies had already begun issuing orders to the other guards. Years of training took over as the palace's defensive protocols activated. Thomas sprinted toward the main building to raise the alarm while other guards emerged from their posts, weapons ready and shields raised. But Marcus could see they were outnumbered. The attacking force consisted of at least 8 skilled warriors, all mounted and heavily armed. The palace guards were trained and experienced, but they were caught off guard and fighting in conditions that favored the attackers. One of the enemy riders broke through the outer defenses and charged directly at Marcus's position. The man's sword gleamed as he raised it high, preparing to strike down the young watchman who had been going about his routine duties just minutes earlier. Marcus raised his own blade to block, knowing that his limited combat experience might not be enough to survive this encounter. But before the enemy warrior could complete his strike, Sarah appeared beside Marcus like an avenging angel. Her sword intercepted the attacker's blade with such force that the sound rang out across the courtyard like a bell. In one continuous motion, she disarmed the rider and pulled him from his horse, ending the threat with the precise efficiency of a master warrior. "Stay close to me, Marcus," she ordered, her eyes scanning for the next threat. "Your courage is admirable, but you're not trained for this level of combat." Marcus felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment, but he followed her advice and remained near her protective presence. Around them, the battle continued to rage as more palace guards joined the fight. The enemy riders were skilled, but they had lost the element of surprise and were now facing determined resistance. Sergeant Davies had organized the guards into defensive positions that maximized their advantages and minimized the enemy's mobility. Crossbow bolts flew from the palace walls as archers took their positions. The sound of steel against steel filled the air, punctuated by shouts of command and cries of pain. During a brief lull in the fighting, Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. "Listen carefully. I need you to do something that could save the kingdom. Can I count on you?" Marcus nodded without hesitation, though his hands were shaking from adrenaline and fear. "What do you need me to do?" Sarah pressed the sealed document into his hands, the parchment containing the enemy battle plans she had risked her life to obtain. "Take this directly to the king. Don't stop for anyone. Don't let anyone else handle it, and don't trust anyone who tries to intercept you. The information in this document is the only thing that can prevent a catastrophic defeat. But what about you? You're the one who should deliver it. You're the colonel, the hero. They'll listen to you." Sarah's expression was grim but determined. "I may not survive this fight, Marcus. These attackers came specifically to kill me and recover this intelligence. Even if I do survive, I'll be needed here to help coordinate the defenses. You're unknown to the enemy. They have no reason to suspect that a simple watchman carries the kingdom's salvation." Another wave of arrows forced them to take cover again. Marcus could see that the battle was taking its toll on both sides. Several palace guards had fallen, and 2 of the enemy riders lay motionless in the courtyard. But the attackers were regrouping for what looked like a final, desperate assault on the palace's inner defenses. "Go now, while they're distracted," Sarah urged. "Use the servants' entrance near the kitchen. It's less likely to be watched. Find the king and make him understand that everything depends on the information in that document." Marcus tucked the parchment inside his armor, close to his heart. "How will I convince him to listen to me?" "I'm just a gate guard. Tell him that Colonel Sarah Blackwood sent you, and that the northern mission was not a failure. It was a success that cost everything to achieve. He'll understand what that means. Before Marcus could ask more questions, Sarah was moving again, her sword dancing through the darkness as she engaged another enemy warrior. Marcus realized that this might be the last time he ever saw the legendary colonel alive. The woman who had been declared dead was now fighting to save the kingdom with her life hanging in the balance once again. Marcus began making his way toward the servants' entrance, staying low and moving from shadow to shadow. Behind him, the battle continued with renewed intensity. He could hear Sarah's voice calling out tactical instructions to the other guards, her military expertise helping to organize their resistance even in the midst of combat. The servants' entrance was unguarded, as Sarah had predicted. Marcus slipped inside the palace and found himself in familiar corridors that now seemed strange and threatening in the flickering torchlight. Every shadow could hide an enemy agent, and every sound made him jump with nervous energy. As he made his way through the palace toward the royal chambers, Marcus encountered other palace staff who were responding to the alarm. Servants barricaded windows while guards took defensive positions. The entire building was transforming into a fortress, preparing for a siege that everyone hoped would never come. But Marcus knew, thanks to the document pressed against his chest, that this attack was only the beginning. The real threat would come in 3 days, and only the information Sarah had died to obtain could prevent total disaster. Commander Reynolds appeared at the end of a corridor, directing a group of guards toward the main entrance. When he saw Marcus, his expression showed both relief and concern. "Guard Webb, what's your status? We heard fighting at the eastern gate." "Sir, I carry urgent intelligence that must reach the king immediately. Colonel Sarah Blackwood has returned from her mission, and she's currently fighting to protect the palace from enemy agents who followed her here." Commander Reynolds stopped short, his face showing the same disbelief that Marcus had felt earlier. "Colonel Blackwood is dead, guard." "What are you talking about?" Marcus realized that convincing people of Sarah's return was going to be as challenging as surviving the battle itself. Time was running out. Enemy forces were preparing to strike the kingdom in just 3 days, and the only person who could prevent disaster was fighting for her life in the courtyard. Below, the fate of the kingdom now rested in the hands of a simple watchman who had been doing routine tasks just hours earlier. Royal Watchman Story, Part 5. Commander Reynolds grabbed Marcus by the shoulders, his eyes intense with urgency. "Guard Webb, I need you to explain exactly what's happening. Lives may depend on your accuracy." Marcus took a deep breath and spoke as clearly as possible despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Sir, Colonel Sarah Blackwood approached my gate approximately 1 hour ago. She provided the correct security information and bore the royal seal granted to her before her mission. She claims to have escaped from enemy captivity with critical intelligence about an impending attack on the kingdom." The commander's expression shifted from disbelief to careful attention. "What kind of intelligence?" "She says the forces we've been fighting are a diversion. The real attack will come in 3 days using methods we haven't anticipated. She gave me documents containing enemy battle plans that she copied while in captivity." Marcus patted the parchment concealed in his armor. Before Commander Reynolds could respond, a tremendous crash echoed through the palace as something heavy struck the main doors. Shouts and the sound of splintering wood indicated that the enemy forces had breached the outer defenses and were now attempting to enter the building itself. "Show me these documents," the commander ordered. Marcus hesitated, remembering Sarah's specific instructions to trust no one except the king himself. But as another crash shook the palace walls, he realized that following protocol might be less important than stopping an immediate threat. He withdrew the sealed parchment and handed it to Commander Reynolds. The commander broke the black wax seal and unrolled the document, his eyes scanning the contents rapidly. Marcus could see the color drain from the man's face as he read. "Dear God," Reynolds whispered, "if this information is accurate, we have perhaps 72 hours before the kingdom faces complete destruction." "Then you believe Colonel Blackwood is alive?" Reynolds rolled the document and tucked it inside his own armor. "At this point, it doesn't matter whether I believe it or not. The intelligence in this document is too detailed and too specific to be fabricated. Someone with deep knowledge of enemy capabilities created this, and we must act on the assumption that it's genuine." The sound of fighting had moved inside the palace now. Steel rang against steel in nearby corridors, and Marcus could hear orders being shouted in the foreign language he had heard from the attacking riders. "Sir, Shouldn't we take the document to the king immediately? Commander Reynolds was already moving toward the sounds of battle, drawing his sword as he walked. The king is in the secure chambers 3 floors above us. The enemy agents are between us and him, which means we need to fight our way through them to deliver this intelligence. Marcus found himself following the commander deeper into the palace, rather than away from the danger as every instinct told him to do. But he understood that the document he had carried was now the most important thing in the kingdom, and protecting it was worth any risk. They encountered their first enemy agent at the intersection of 2 corridors. The foreign warrior was attempting to force his way past 2 palace guards who had barricaded themselves behind an overturned table. Commander Reynolds attacked without warning, his decades of military experience showing in the precise way he dispatched the threat. "This way," he ordered Marcus, leading him through passages that avoided the main fighting. "We need to reach the king's chambers while the enemy is still focused on the lower levels." As they climbed a narrow staircase reserved for senior staff, Marcus could hear the battle raging throughout the palace. Windows shattered as arrows flew through them. Doors splintered under the force of enemy weapons. The sound suggested that this was not a small raiding party, but a significant assault force designed to cause maximum damage. "Commander," Marcus said as they reached the 2nd floor, Colonel Blackwood said these attackers came specifically to kill her and recover the intelligence. "That means they know how valuable this information is." Reynolds paused at a landing, listening carefully to the sounds around them, "which means they'll pursue us once they realize the document is no longer with her. We need to move faster." They encountered 2 more enemy agents on the 3rd floor, but Commander Reynolds' skill and Marcus's determination proved sufficient to overcome them. Marcus was surprised by his own courage. The ordinary watchman who had spent his days checking papers was now fighting to save his kingdom alongside one of its most senior officers. The king's secure chambers were protected by a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. 2 royal guards stood watch outside, their weapons drawn and their expressions grim. When they saw Commander Reynolds approaching, they straightened to attention. "Commander, what's the situation below?" "We're under attack by foreign agents, but that's not the immediate concern. I need to see His Majesty immediately. We have intelligence that affects the survival of the kingdom." One of the guards knocked on the heavy door in a specific pattern. 3 short knocks, 2 long ones, then 3 short again. A voice from within called for identification, and the guard responded with what Marcus assumed was a password. After a moment, they heard the sound of multiple locks being opened. The door swung open to reveal King Edward himself, still wearing his evening robes but with a sword at his side. The monarch was a man in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that took in the situation immediately. "Commander Reynolds, I trust you have good reason for this emergency audience. Your Majesty, I present Guard Marcus Webb, who carries intelligence that may prevent the fall of our kingdom." Reynolds gestured for Marcus to step forward. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the moment, a simple watchman, standing before the king he had sworn to protect, carrying information that could change the course of history. He knelt as protocol demanded, but King Edward gestured for him to rise quickly. "Speak, Guard Webb. What intelligence do you carry?" Marcus found his voice and began to explain everything that had happened. Sarah's miraculous return, the enemy attack, and the document containing battle plans for an assault that would begin in 3 days. As he spoke, King Edward's expression grew increasingly serious. When Marcus finished his account, the king turned to Commander Reynolds. "You've examined these battle plans?" "Yes, Your Majesty. The level of detail suggests they're genuine. If accurate, enemy forces are planning a coordinated attack using tactics we've never encountered. Our current defensive preparations would be completely inadequate." King Edward took the document and read it himself, his face growing pale as he absorbed the information. Outside the secure chambers, the sounds of fighting continued, but Marcus could tell that the immediate battle was winding down. Either the palace guards had won or the enemy had achieved their objectives and withdrawn. "Guard Webb," the king said finally. "You mentioned that Colonel Blackwood is alive and currently fighting in our defense. Is this confirmed?" "Your Majesty, I spoke with her personally. She provided security information that only the real Colonel Blackwood would know, and she bore the royal seal granted for her original mission." The king was quiet for a long moment, processing information that challenged everything he had believed about recent events. Finally, He looked up with determination in his eyes. If Colonel Blackwood is indeed alive and has provided us with this intelligence, she has once again proven herself invaluable to our kingdom. Commander Reynolds, what is our immediate situation? Royal Watchman Story, Part 6, Commander. Reynolds moved to the window and carefully peered through the heavy curtains. The sounds of battle had indeed quieted, leaving an eerie silence that seemed almost more threatening than the previous chaos. Your Majesty, it appears the immediate attack has ended. I can see several enemy bodies in the courtyard, but no movement from hostile forces. King Edward set the battle plans on his desk and looked directly at Marcus. Guard Webb, I need you to return to the courtyard and determine Colonel Blackwood's status. If she survived this attack, I want her brought here immediately. Her expertise will be crucial in preparing our defenses against the main assault. Marcus felt honored that the king would entrust him with such an important mission, but he was also terrified at the thought of returning to the battlefield. Your Majesty, what if there are still enemy agents in the palace? Take 2 of my personal guards with you, the king replied. But move quickly. We have less than 3 days to prepare for an attack that could destroy everything our ancestors built. As Marcus prepared to leave with the 2 royal guards, King Edward called him back. Guard Webb, your actions tonight have already saved the kingdom once. Colonel Blackwood chose well when she trusted you with this mission. Whatever happens in the coming days, know that your service will be remembered. The journey back through the palace revealed the full scope of the battle that had taken place. Broken furniture, shattered windows, and scorch marks on the walls told the story of fierce fighting throughout the building. Several palace guards were receiving medical attention, but Marcus was relieved to see that most had survived the attack. When they reached the eastern courtyard where the battle had begun, Marcus's heart nearly stopped. Bodies of both enemy agents and palace defenders lay scattered across the cobblestones, but there was no sign of Colonel Sarah Blackwood among either the living or the dead. Sergeant Davies approached, his armor dented and his left arm in a makeshift sling. His face showed exhaustion and relief in equal measure. Marcus, thank God you're safe. Did you deliver the intelligence to the king? Yes, sir. His Majesty is studying the battle plans now. But where is Colonel Blackwood? Is she? She's alive, Davies said, and Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. Wounded but alive. She's in the medical chamber with the palace physician. The woman fought like 10 soldiers. I've never seen anything like it. She personally defeated 4 enemy agents and probably saved all our lives. The medical chamber was a small room near the kitchen, where the palace physician treated injured staff. Marcus found Sarah sitting on a wooden table, while an elderly doctor cleaned and bandaged a deep cut on her shoulder. Despite her injuries, her eyes were alert and focused. Marcus, she said when she saw him enter. You did it. I can see it in your face. You reached the king. Yes, ma'am. His Majesty has read the battle plans and wants to speak with you immediately. He believes the intelligence is genuine. Sarah winced as the physician tightened a bandage, but her expression showed satisfaction rather than pain. Then we have a chance. A small chance, but better than none. The physician, a thin man with gentle hands and worried eyes, looked up from his work. Colonel, you've lost a significant amount of blood and these wounds need time to heal properly. I strongly advise against any strenuous activity for at least a week. Sarah stood up carefully, testing her balance and mobility. Doctor, in 3 days there may not be a kingdom left to recover in. I'll rest when our people are safe. The return journey to the king's chambers took longer because of Sarah's injuries, but she refused assistance from anyone. Marcus walked beside her, marveling at the strength and determination of this legendary warrior who had already given so much for their kingdom. When they entered the secure chambers, King Edward rose from his desk and approached Sarah with obvious emotion. Colonel Blackwood, when we held your memorial service 3 months ago, I thought I had lost one of my most valuable officers. To see you alive and still fighting for our people, it's more than I dared hope. Sarah knelt despite her injuries, but the king quickly gestured for her to rise. Your Majesty, I regret that my mission took so long to complete, but the intelligence I gathered will give us the advantage we need to survive the coming attack. I've studied your battle plans, Colonel. The enemy's strategy is unlike anything we've faced before. How do you recommend we prepare our defenses? Sarah moved to the desk and spread out the documents, pointing to specific sections as she spoke. The main assault will come from 3 directions simultaneously. designed to overwhelm our traditional defensive positions. But they don't expect us to know about their plan, which means we can prepare counter-strategies that will turn their own tactics against them. For the next hour, Marcus listened as Sarah and King Edward discussed military strategies that were far beyond his understanding. But he could see the hope growing in the king's eyes as Sarah explained how the kingdom could not only survive the attack, but potentially end the war entirely by defeating the enemy's main force. As dawn began to break outside the windows, Sarah concluded her briefing. "Your Majesty, with your permission, I would like to take personal command of the eastern defenses. That sector will bear the brunt of the initial assault, and my knowledge of their tactics will be most valuable there." King Edward nodded his approval. "Colonel Blackwood, you have whatever resources and personnel you need. The survival of our kingdom rests in your capable hands once again." The king then turned to Marcus, who had remained quietly in the background throughout the strategy session. "Guardweb, I have a special assignment for you as well." Marcus straightened to attention, wondering what role a simple watchman could play in the defense of the kingdom. "Yes, Your Majesty. You will serve as Colonel Blackwood's personal aide during the battle. Your courage and reliability have already proven invaluable, and she will need someone she can trust completely." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the honor, but also terrified by the responsibility. 3 days ago, his biggest concern had been staying awake during quiet afternoon watch duties. Now he was being asked to help defend the kingdom alongside its greatest military hero. Sarah looked at him with approval. Marcus has already shown that he can perform under pressure. I would be honored to have him at my side during the coming battle. As they prepared to leave the king's chambers and begin organizing the kingdom's defenses, Marcus realized that his life had changed forever. The routine duties of a royal watchman were behind him now. Whatever the outcome of the battle in 3 days, he would face it as a defender of the realm, standing beside the legendary Colonel Sarah Blackwood in what might be the most important fight in their kingdom's history. The morning sun streamed through the palace windows as they walked toward the eastern courtyard, where Marcus had first encountered Sarah emerging from the darkness with a weapon in her hand and respect in her bearing. Now he understood that the weapon represented her determination to protect their people, and the respect she had shown was for every person willing to stand and fight for what they believed in. In 3 days, they would discover whether courage, intelligence, and determination would be enough to save their kingdom. But Marcus knew that regardless of the outcome, he had been part of something greater than himself, something that would be remembered long after the battle was over.